Welcome to EPJ Pathshala. I am Pirzada Rauf. I teach at Jindal Global University. Today, in the idea of resources, we will be talking about the concept of resource geography. In resource geography, we have certain keywords, and those are social capital, use value of resources, production factor, historical materialism. In its introduction, geography of resources deals with or can be defined as the study of area, line and a dot. All the physical features found on the Earth's surface can be classified in the above three mathematical representations. But to appreciate and make proper assessment of these features, human interference becomes the central theme for any study of any physical features. Resource geography evolved from physical geography. When the geographers realized that the resource can't be studied in isolation from humans, then came the question of establishing a branch of geography, a discipline of geography which could study the economical relation of the humans with the nature in a given spatial dimension. These gave birth to resource geography, economic geography, which study not only the natural resources but also provide a special analysis to the resources in context of the human economical needs. The subject was systematically designed to include human and other material aspects as the sub-branch within the scope of this discipline. With time, resource geography became a merging point for the economic and the political aspect in the branch of geography. This gave rise to a new branch as political economy. This merging has given a space to the Marxist approach in resource distribution and special justice. The talk of social injustice involved in the resource appraisal has become a new trend in geography, with geographers like David Harvey debunking the old bourgeois idea of static concept of resource geography. He explained that the discipline has developed itself into a dialectical science to study the human and the nature relation within a spatial framework. The human aspect in the discipline is explained as human beings through the labor they provide and the organizations they staff. This also talks about and considers the resources and this term which can be defined through skills, energies, talents, abilities and knowledge that are used for production of goods or the rendering of services. In a project management context, human resources are those employees responsible for undertaking actions defined in the project. We have many concepts regarding resource geography. One is about the relative idea or a relative concept from the framework of special human analysis of resources on the Earth's surface. Resource geography evolved as a concept which is relative to the patterns of human and economic relational setup in the given natural framework of resources. The relativity involved gives a dialectical perspective to the resource appraisal and management. There is an overlapping between the economies and the geography of resources which can be analyzed only in a relative framework. From a substantive to a relational understanding, human action is relational in character because individuals do not act atomistically without context. Economic decisions which are important and are made considering the social structure of the institutions and their relational attributes. This decides the policy frames and the set of actions that need to be done. This concept is to be applied in the field of resource in order to develop the relational understanding of resource in geospatial platform. One of the ways of doing this is to point out the shortcomings of conventional views on resource management. Here, we will talk about how resources are produced in a relational space, having a relative connection with the various components of resources. The process of resource production is done through the control over the relational space that comprises of the political, economic, and social makeup of society around us. This set of analysis brings us closer to the economic and social geography, but yet resource-centric study of society and economy is different from the traditional branches of geography. Material resources. The explanation for the material resources goes as like this. It explains the material of every resource which satisfies, or every source which satisfies human wants. When we talk about material resources, we usually think of raw materials, intermediate products, machinery and equipment, as well as different kinds of infrastructure which are used by firms. These resources are limited in terms of their availability and are used up through consumption. There is therefore a shortage problem, and that drives economic action according to neoclassical economics. From a substantive view, these resources are production factors which can be acquired by firms and which are exploited according to firms' needs. In a relational understanding, material resources are not automatically viewed as factors with an inherent use value and predetermined application. In this view, it is acknowledged that resources can be used in many different ways for different purposes. The use value of a resource depends on social context within which goals are and capabilities are shaped. Resources can be defined as bundles of possible services. As said by Penrose, it is necessary to differentiate between resources and their respective services because it is possible to acquire and to characterize resources independently from the purpose they serve. The only and particular use that determines the way in which they enter into the production process as inputs, how valuable they are and what they want, and how they might strengthen a firm's competitiveness. Penrose prefers the term resource over production factor, as the latter does not allow for a distinction between the factor itself and the possible services. It strictly speaks of as resources themselves that are inputs in the production process, but only the services that the resource can render. A relational concept of resources has consequences for the conceptualization of firms. In conventional economic analysis, firms are defined in terms of outputs they produce. In the resource-based view of a firm, in contrast, a firm is defined according to its inputs. In this view, and according to this concept, we have firms as defined as bundles of resources and which can be characterized by their specific resource profile. Thus, it is visible that different combination of resource which can lead to different economic benefits to the firms. Only by distinguishing between material resources and their multiple potential applications is it possible to understand the heterogeneity of firms, their output specificity and different strategies. Resources are not just the material that satisfies human present needs, but it also deals with the future of human political and economic development. Firms do not necessarily gain higher returns than others because they have better resources. Their better performance is also a consequence of using their resources in a different or superior manner. the difference in return between best and second best service of a particular resource can be defined as its quasi-rent. Here the distinction between the substantive and relational understanding of resources becomes very clear. Whereas in the substantive understanding, resources are defined as very objective production factors characterized by predefined input and output relationships. In a relational understanding of the resources, we have multiple potential services of these resources at work and which needs an emphasis. The particular use of resource does not only depend on the physical characteristics but also is influenced by a number of contextual conditions, some of which can be described as below. A firm-specific competition. Each firm has a stock of knowledge, capabilities and experience which it has developed over a period of time and which also shapes the identification of the particular uses for the resources at hand. It is though these specific competencies that firms are able to integrate resources into their production processes in a particular way. The set of accumulated knowledge of a firm can also be viewed as a resource. Then we have a mental model. The competence of a firm are part of its overall mental model or dominant logic. This interpretative framework impacts the way in which existing competencies are used and which enables a joint understanding of the knowledge pools. The interpretations which are attached to the internal and external information flows of a firm indicate its organizational capacities, routines which have been developed over time and through which new information can be processed and transformed into action, which shape the interpretations. According to Nelson and Winter, organizational routines are the skills of a firm. Through the development and diffusion of new interpretative schemes, it is possible to reinterpret existing knowledge and to attach it to new uses, or to find new innovative uses for existing resources. The market conditions, where we talk about potential returns of an innovative use of a resource, also depends on the productive opportunities and constraints in the market. These productive opportunities define which specific competencies can be combined with or adjusted to one or the other of the resources for success. This depends on the overall competitive demand and supplier-customer environments capable of supplying innovative resource applications and of processing the resources further. The external market conditions may also constrain the development and use of resource depending on the instance on the market power of the key players or institutional constraints such as the dominant technological standards. The other important aspect of this setup is knowledge. The distinction between resources and their possible services emphasizes that the value and the use of material resources are not predetermined, but are contingent and depend on their particular social context. Hence, substantive concepts of resources cannot explain how firms gain competitiveness and become innovative. To understand this fully, we have to consider the process of knowledge production or knowledge generation, both within and outside the firm. The interdependence between knowledge and the knowledge base and the structure and the strategy of a firm generate a reflexive process of specialization through which particular capabilities are continuously reproduced and also extended. At the same level, knowledge is just the result of previous productive uses of resources. It can be conceptualized as the relational resource itself. In the knowledge creation view of the firm, which can be viewed as a generalization of the resource-based view, knowledge also here talks about the decisive asset of the firm, and knowledge creation is the key mechanism through which firms produce and sustain the competition. In this perspective, knowledge is viewed as the key resource of the developing reflexive or learning economies. Here, the fourth important factor which deals with resources and their conceptualization is power. In substantive concepts, power is viewed as a characteristic of an economic actor or organization based on ownership and control of the material resources. According to this perspective, agents either having power or they are not having power. By controlling access to these resources, some actors in economic processes dominate others. In the light of understanding, the critical analysts have described multinational firms as being extremely powerful, primarily because of their size and capability to regulate access to the resources and the labor in international markets. This is sometimes recognized as the main cause of stagnation and underdevelopment in the third world countries. In this line of thought, we have to understand that how it is to be fought against and limited by state intervention. This view still exists today in discussions about the power of firms versus the power of nation states. For example, how Dickinson talked about it. Although there is a lot of truth in the view, it is based on limited conceptualization of power. Power cannot be regarded as an inscribed capacity which an actor possesses based on ownership of resources. Using geographical lens, we can find many examples which demonstrate that asymmetrical distribution of material resources do not determine the outcome of economic action, which is the major scope for the study of resource geography. It can, for instance, be quite difficult for a firm to coordinate its production activities in remote branch plants located in different countries, even if resource access is under the full control of headquarters. There are also many reports of international mergers and acquisitions which have failed because it has not been possible to synchronize the activities in the different workplaces, despite the centralized resource control. The other aspect would be, and is an important aspect, is the idea of social capital. A substantive understanding of resources presupposes that resources have objective, inherent value, and they can be assigned to specified actors based on the idea of property rights or explained earlier as special ownership. Through social ownership paradigm, distribution and appraisal is the part of resource geography. In the foregoing discussions of material resources, knowledge and power, we have already demonstrated that a substantive conceptualization can be quite problematic. In this case of social capital, it is virtually impossible to develop a useful substantive perspective about resources. In contrast to material resources or physical capital, social capital can be attributed to individual actors or firms. Generally, it refers to the opportunities that actors draw from quality and the structure of their relations with each other and other actors in order to pursue individual objectives. Social capital is thus constituted in the very relations between the actors involved and is the result of ongoing social practices. Actors simply do not have the universal capability to exploit networks according to their own goals. They can never possess or build social capital without the active involvement of others. This concept introduces a perspective that acknowledges resources as a fundamental source of power and influence, and integrates these resources into a framework of multiple forms of capital. Material concept. This idea of resources deals with resource geography and implies the material link to human perspective in resource appraisal and management. Matters in contemporary human geography and the inextricably bound up in the historicity of particular thoughts and contestations over the currency and intelligibility of academic knowledge. It has to be stated that the focus of materiality and appropriately dates back to Marxism known as historical materialism. Its profound influence on geographical thought. It is to recall that the Marxist geographers are largely concerned with the structural conditions of inequalities, the class struggles, and the housing segregation, which still remain crucial for some geographers to explore, and the material fabric of the society. This inequality is in materiality involved the undemocratic management and distribution pattern in the resources. The question of appropriation for primary accumulation centers the question of resource geography. However, there are 2 points to be made. First, the emergence of these works has to be understood as the part of a response to the persistent call to the rematerialized human geography. Second, the successful, to some extent, rematerializing of human geography is not simply to return to the brick and mortar of materiality, but instead the traditional materialist understanding of inequalities, special segregation and discrimination based on social differences take on new meanings, and not a simple revisionist ideal of returning to the political economy approach. New theoretical empirical lines of focus emerge, as we can understand through this idea that we have materiality, human geography approach, sometimes talking about something strange that has happened to resource geography. Issues of resource supply, resource control, and the effects of rampant resource consumption on the planet Earth, which talks about the health of planet now and the resurgent geopolitics. It questions the value and the identity which are articulated with stunning clarity in popular struggles over resource appropriation. The nature continues to enjoy a prolonged moment in the sun within academic inquiry, and yet the scope and the purpose, even the existence of a formal sub-discipline of resource geography are surprisingly unclear. This idea of journal, for example, has not published work that identifies itself as resource geography since 1990s. The disappearance of resource geography as a formal field, however, is misleading. There is, on the one hand, a substantial body of work in the applied and teaching traditions of resource management and environmental conservation that embraces the term resource unproblematic ally and which seeks to organize, administer, and produce new resource geographies that rationalize public and private management. The objectives like that of efficiency and optimization of welfare or sustainability, or on the other hand resources such as soil, groundwater, timber, fish, which form the empirical heart of some of the most exciting theoretically informed research by geographers in the recent years. Most often, however, this work files under the flag of political ecology, eco-Marxism, agro-food studies, or environmental history and applies to resources. Rather than it derives from them theoretical approaches like the production of nature or the social construction of nature developed elsewhere in geography. In short, we understand that resource geography is recognized at all as most often as managerialist agenda through a managerialist agenda and not as theoretically vibrant area of inquiry or a field with its own set of approaches. To a degree, this resurgence of studies of resource geographies was anticipated by call to place the matter of nature squarely within the sights of politically engaged human geography. In the summary, we will talk about that with time, resource geography became a merging point for the economic and political aspect of branch of geography. This merging has given a space to the Marxist approach in resource distribution and special justice. Resources are not only bundles of potential services, but are also assets for future returns. Something rather strange which has happened to resource geography is that the issues of resource supply, resource control, and the effects of rampant consumption of resources on the planet Earth are now resurgent in geopolitics, and the questions about value and identity are articulated with stunning clarity in popular struggles over resources and the resource appropriation. Thank you.